History laid the foundation
that informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
From the church to the streets, and even in the suites, and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom.
Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Fannie Lou's Classroom. I'm so hyped and excited about the conversation on today. We have two amazing guests. I know I say that every week, but I can't help it. We know amazing people. So we have two more this week, and we're going to have a great conversation today as we are in the holiday season. We want to talk about grief, trauma, and Kwanzaa. And we're going to pull all that together and talk about the ways in which sometimes rituals can be a place of healing for us. And so we have two great people here today who are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about joy and pain, like sunshine and rain.
Come on, May.
So we're super excited. But first, I always have to shout out the FLC team. We're nearing the end of season 3. And, of course, they have been phenomenal. And first, we always shout out Brooke, who is our audio engineer and everything in between, camera, operator. And those good old claps, y'all hear that clap? That's Brooke. Give yourself another clap, Brooke. And of course, I always shout out Cheryl and Shanika, who do amazing work getting us prepped and ready from week to week. A lot of work goes in getting us prepared for Thursday. So I certainly don't take their many gifts and talents and their heart for ministry for granted. So we appreciate the Fannie Lou Classroom team. Let's give it up for Shanika and Cheryl.
Yes.
And Cheryl up here giving it up for herself.
There you go. Sometimes you got to do it.
So listen, we want to go ahead and introduce our two guests, and we're going to just jump right into this amazing conversation on today. So we have first the Reverend Dr. Dina Anderson. Dina was born in Toledo, Ohio, and she accepted Christ early in life and under the pastorate of her uncle. Is he bishop? Pastor Leon Witty. Under his leadership, she was trained and nurtured to sing, to recite, to serve with the spirit of excellence. And we see that every day here at Friendship West. And in pursuit of her academic excellence, she attended University of Toledo and Lourdes University, where she obtained a Bachelor of Business Administration. In her efforts to achieve higher academia, she obtained a graduated Magna Cum Laude. Some of us graduated. Thank you, Laude. With a Master of Business Administration from Lourdes University. In her pursuit of knowledge and understanding of God, she graduated with honors, earning a Master of Religious Leadership Administration at New York Theological Seminary. She is a Lilly Foundation Scholarship recipient with an earned doctorate degree at New York Theological Seminary in 2021, focusing on trauma interventions that motivate survivors to release the toxins from sexual abuse and other mistreatment. Above all, she considers herself her greatest accomplishment, the gift of a wonderful son, Brian Blake Anderson Ellis, who I hear about so much, and she is a proud mother, as she should be. Dr. Anderson is the founder of Sacred Place. Sacred Place, Sacred Space is a nonprofit organization that provides access to resources that support women, men, and children who are suffering in silence but are willing to open the portals of dark past and embrace emotional, physical, psychological healing and transformation. By divine appointment, God chose Dr. Dina Anderson to transform lives and proclaim the gospel to the nations. Currently, Dr. Anderson serves as the children's pastor here at Friendship West Baptist Church. Let's welcome Dr. Dina Anderson to Fannie Lou's Classroom.
Thank you so much.
And we're excited that she is our new children's pastor. She's still working her way through Friendship West, learning about who we are. And she's learning what, like Shanika learned when she came on board. You learn here by immersion. So she has been immersed into the Friendship West way, and she is doing a beautiful job. And we thank her for her beautiful and warm spirit and what she brings to this branch of Zion. Then we have Reverend William E. White, W-E-W. That's like I was calling you over on Hampton. Reverend William White is a gifted teacher and preacher of the Word of God. His profound and practical preaching stimulates the head and stirs the heart. He shares biblical truth in ways that communicates to young children and seasoned adults. His message ministered to single and married adults, no matter the venue or occasion. God uses him to inspire, educate, and elevate people to lead better than they came. And I'm going to pause there because I'm going to say that's not hyperbole. That's not somebody exaggerating his bio. That is what he does.
Amen.
If you're walking down the street and you may stop and say, yeah, work is rough. Let me pray for you, right? And he will stop and pray with you right there. So he is indeed, what I just read is the truth. Okay, because some people, we embellish our bios to sound like we do all this amazing spirit, but he really does it. He walks it like he talks it, okay? So Reverend White has shared in ministry for more than 30 years under the umbrella of churches including Bethel Baptist Church in Tallahassee, Florida, Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church in Gainesville, Florida, Mount Olive Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas, and he has been dedicated and faithful member for 20 years at Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, where he currently serves as pastor of discipleship. He also ministers to FWBC's weekly Wednesday noon prayer and Bible study sessions called Word and Wonders on Wednesdays at noon. So you can always tune in at noon on Wednesdays to get you that noonday Bible study. Like you tune in and get your lunch here, a different kind of lunch for Family's Class. So you can get you a different kind of lunch on Wednesday that can sustain you through this life. He dedicates, His decades of discipleship include diverse and dynamic ministry experiences in marriage and singles ministry, pastoral counseling, assimilation, writing, editing, and leadership training. He has hosted radio broadcasts that ministers to men, and currently he can be heard on the Men's Bible Study program Monday at 12 o'clock p.m. to 12:30 p.m. on the internet station KGC radio.com. He has taught and preached to national and international audiences. He is the product of the Columbus Public Schools of Columbus, Ohio, another Ohio person in the house. He graduated with a business degree from Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida. Come on, HBCU.
Yes.
With a Master's of Theology degree from Dallas Theological Seminary right here in Dallas, Texas. Let's welcome my colleague, my friend, since I've been at Friendship West since 1998, Reverend William White, who I always call WEW.
Yes.
Place like WWW Wrestling. So that was kind of like, but wow, this is what happens when you read bios of people that I work with every day. I didn't see radio. We said you had a radio voice. Now that makes sense, right? So thank you all for being here. I wanted to have this conversation as we are in the holiday season. And just kind of, I tried to bookend this thing, right? You're kind of in the middle, like week before last, before the holiday break. We had guests here to talk about, how are the children, right? And so we talked about the challenges the unique challenges that our particularly black children and black and brown children, specifically African-American children face, the myriad of things, all the intersections that lead to a lot of struggles that they have, right? In school, out of school, in the home, et cetera. And we're going to end the season, right, talking about how we get our minds together to have a better 24 and deal with some of the trauma and the pain that we have. So kind of nestled in the middle there, I want to even be more targeted, picking up on our last conversation around how the children, to really talk about grief, trauma, and Kwanzaa. Because I want to lean into, what are some practical things that we need to talk about? How do we deal with trauma? What are some tools we can give people, particularly during the holiday season has a way of kind of making other things manifest. It becomes layered. But I think we also have some things at our disposal that can help some healing. And I think Kwanzaa is one, and we'll deal a lot more about Kwanzaa too. We'll kind of talk about those intersections a bit. So let's just jump right in. But first, I'll give you both the opportunity. Did you want to have any, by way of introduction, is there anything you wanted to share by way of introduction?
I think you already did it. You did a great job. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm just glad to be one of the Ohio players, and so we're here. Yes. You want to shine a flashlight on the situation.
All right, yes. So this is, I would hit up right there, flashlight. Okay, so let's talk about it then. So let's talk about it from this standpoint first, because Dr. Dina is the current pastor of Children's. Mm-hmm. You are a former pastor of Children's. And so we know children that come to the church are the same children we're talking about who go to school, who deal with family. Like all the things we talk about with our children does not go away because they walk inside of the church. So maybe let's start with what have you, just in your years of experience, right, as the pastor of children, and then of course currently, what are we seeing in our children that you can see that they're carrying grief and trauma? Well, let's start there, and then we'll kind of begin to peel more of the layers back.
Yeah. So that is a wonderful setup because they don't just come as persons that we get to minister to on Sunday, but they are coming with whatever they are carrying from what they've been through, not only through the course of the week, and not even just what they may have experienced in terms of a particular event, but just the transgenerational kinds of impact of trauma that they get to see. And so we do get to see it in places where there may be some breakup in the family that causes them to wrestle with identity and to wrestle with security and to wrestle with the sense of their future and their possibilities. We also see it in the kind of that transgenerational trauma that just pervades their situation, especially now. Can't wait to hear what my fellow Ohio player would say about it, but it's especially with much more access to information and exposure to news, that they can be like the old school film that can be overexposed yet underdeveloped, and that can get in the way of their picture becoming what it ought to be, as they do get to see what takes place in terms of police violence, as they do get to hear what goes on in terms of shootings, and sometimes they're hearing about it sooner than we're hearing about it, right? And yet having to have a platform to wrestle with it, and so that becomes a tremendous environment for ministry to take place. But certainly there is so much trauma that goes on around them. What used to be said is that children don't really have a whole lot that they have to go through. That is not the case. In this century, and really not even so much before, right? As we know that so much that took place in terms of movement and in terms of activism often got ignited when children jumped on that bandwagon, and sometimes kicked off the bandwagon. In some places, I'm thinking of a place in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where there were young people who kicked off the boycott of the department stores that were in that area. And, they did it, right? So while there were other places that we saw in the Carolinas that were college students, we saw in North Carolina, we saw Fisk, we saw college students doing it. They're younger and younger that have done it. And then, of course, other places where young people left their high schools and younger to get arrested and to be part of the movement. And so there's always been that kind of consideration, that kind of activism, but the trauma is even more personal now, and where they get a chance to see it and see it in living color way too often. So it's
on
happening.
repeat too, right? The
Yeah.
ways
Right.
in which you watch it over and over
And
again.
over again.
And now these young kids are definitely on electronic devices, and so you're scrolling, the ongoing kind of trauma, not just any trauma, but trauma against people that look just like you,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And then I also, so Dr. Anderson, you want? Well, let me say this. I want you to respond,
Okay.
because I also think what that also does is, let's talk about the ways in which that desensitizes perhaps our children too, right? To violence and to, things that can be destructive to their body and their soul.
Yeah.
As becoming how we may
normal,
normalize, right? So, but if you want to respond to Reverend White, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that too.
Yeah. So, Pastor White, I totally agree that the children are, more exposed now than they were before. I mean, just think of our generation and how we were protected. Our parents protected us from a lot of the trauma that we could have been involved in, right? But these children are right on the front line with trauma. Like, our parents would say, turn the TV off, or children go out of the room, right? But these children are right in it, right? And my only problem is, I have a lot of different problems, is that they're not getting the care that they need in order to receive that information. Like, how do they process that information, right? And how do we shield them from causing it to, create an identity crisis or put them in a situation of harm? Like, we've got to do better, I think, as a community, as parents, as a church, to make sure our children are shielded, right? And they learn how to properly process information. They will go through grief. They will go through trauma. But we need to have a system or systems in place in order for them to be safe, right? And to be able to talk about what they've experienced without the fear of being, spanked or ignored or nothing being done about it. So again, trauma is inevitable,
Right.
especially in our community, right? And even as the Black community in generations before, we normalized trauma.
That's right.
It was just normal, for us to go through certain things. And now we look back, because some of us have not had to go through some hardships, right? And when we see what the kids are going through today, we're like, oh my God, that's horrible. But think about the generations before.
And to your point,
life.
and I've heard, this is something I've heard, and of course they were not children, but they were young adults. Those children, to your point, the young people, young adults who really led a lot of the movements, right, in the 50s and 60s. And one of the things, I don't know whose biography I was reading, or it'll come back to me, but I read a line in there, and I was like, that sounds almost the same thing as if after Emancipation Proclamation, like there was no, here's a big group counseling session that we know that our ancestors needed coming out of a whole different level of trauma. But one of the things the person said was that they went through all of that, but they never had a chance to sit down to rest from the work, to rest from all that they experienced, right? The physical violence, the emotional violence. Like, they never had a chance to deal with any of that.
Yes.
And the person said that even some of their colleagues, they said that's why some of them are older. And they didn't use this word, it's the only way I can frame it right now, was bitter or just hardened, right? Because it's been held so much in their bodies, right, over time. And I think one of the things that happened with Ferguson, which was so beautiful, and I'm going to get around to the role of the church in this, when Mike Brown was, murdered and laid in the streets, and how they seen that. They saw not just their friend, they saw this young Black man who you're having this body lay in the streets for hours, like that person is an animal, right? And what does that mean? What does that say about my self-worth in that moment? And of course, then the aftermath of that with the protests in the streets, et cetera, et cetera. Many older people, clergy, et cetera, wrapped their arms around those young activists and went to ABC, American Baptist College in Nashville, Tennessee, for retreat, for respite, to rest from all that they have seen and experienced and gone through, down to the tear gas and et cetera, right? So I think let's talk about what are some, I think that's a way of responding to that, is noticing that, hey, come in from that for a moment. You have to break. You can't be in that 24/7.
Right.
You have to break away from that to heal yourself. So that's not all you're consuming.
Absolutely.
Right. Because you can't consume all of that.
No.
And be sane.
And be okay. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So because you're seeing evil in real time and what's being done to you, and even when you're trying to sleep and to rest, images, how they can come up. So I think that's a way of doing that. But I'd like to hear from you. And those were, of course, older. Those were like youth, young adults. But I'm wondering, in the same way, what do we do with our children who are carrying that? Because our children some of them see a lot. I mean, stuff that even as older people that we can't even process, that we would need time or help processing. So I'm wondering, what are some practical things? What do we do to help? Because I'm now thinking about that kind of level of trauma. Then we'll go to some other levels. But let's deal with what we're talking about now, outside of what we see, the society, what they're exposed to. What can we do? What are some things we need to do to help our children heal and get it out of them? Because they may not be able to articulate it. So we know what's going on with them. So I'm curious to know what do we do for people who may be listening? It's holiday season, and as you're gathering around family, and people looking okay but not okay. What do we look for, and how do we help the children?
Yeah. So I'll kick off, especially in tandem and in feedback to some of what the brilliant commentary of my partner in this process, and that is one of the things that is fascinating is how we continue to press forward into advances in technology, but not always in advancement in how we stay in touch with each other.
That's good.
In fact, in some ways, what we do is we're receding in those areas.
That's good.
And so that there was a lot that was happening in those days gone by when people could see that kind of evil and trauma that was taking place over the course of the centuries. But there was also a way where the community pulled together.
Yeah.
And of course, there has been a deterioration of that with the. I'm pulling away from the label of white supremacy, because even that in and of itself is a misnomer. The mythology of white supremacy, white fragility, right? And then this idea of that proximity to whiteness has people feeling that we have to get away from each other instead of pull closer to one another. So our communities are not what they once were. And that's an amazing place for that kind of healing to take place.
Yes.
To have a place where you could go and let your hair down, where you have a place where you can talk to somebody, and so I'll just say this because there are a lot of times that we are pathologized for not taking advantage of mental health services, but mental health services have not always been safe for us. And so we have a history of folks who have been taken advantage of in that kind of mix. And for us to come back and say, baby, the reason you don't go, we didn't always hear why. But there were folk who went in and, were institutionalized. There were folks who were called crazy. Because they desired a level of freedom that was not immediately accessible to them, et cetera. So all of that plays into, the resources that are available that allow us to be able to handle the trauma, to process it, and then to be able to reach a place of homeostasis, a place of being okay, a place of being able to continue to be fruitful in the fight. Sometimes just the pervasiveness of the problem means that there are times when there are warriors who say, well, I can't rest now because there's just too much to do, right? And so there are people who just press because of the urgency and the extent of the issues and the problems and the trauma. So there's a way where that keeps us going in a way where we can function. That's what I want to say, right? Where we can be functional. But the other side of that is, when do we get a chance, as to your point, to actually decompress, where we get a chance to pull away from all that trauma? Where do we get a place where we can really wrestle with the grief? And so the deterioration of community is a challenge, because so we still got the barbershop and the beauty shop. There's a little bit of that, right? We still got some places where sometimes we have relationships, but that idea of having a communal place to be able to deal is something that is in need of restoration in order to deal with our community at large, with people and with our people in general.
Yeah, thank you for that very thoughtful and thorough response, and so on point. And I think I'm glad you brought up, and likewise with medical field, right? Well, Black folks don't go to the doctor. Like we know why. And the why behind we push back against that. And the same thing with mental health services. So I think our challenge is, and so we do this even as we talk about the Black maternal health. What we're saying is, we know that there's a problem, but we're also saying, hey, we are resilient enough to come up with alternative ways to making sure that we are safe, that we are whole, that we survive, moments of giving childbirth. So I'm also thinking mental health service, same thing, right? I think now we have more access to Black therapists, particularly, I think I'm definitely seeing more and more in the past, probably before COVID for sure, but during COVID, you saw more and more people posting, like, here's where you can find, like, a Black therapist or you can feel safe and comfortable. I'm now seeing Black men opening up all Black male therapist spaces, right? So I think, to your point, I think the challenge then is, how do we make sure people are aware, the awareness of where you can go and get these services, where you won't be saying that you're crazy, or that people understand, like, your context, where you're coming from. They have the cultural sensibilities that are needed to understand why you feel the way you do, or why you interpret things the way you interpret that. Understand the dynamics. I know all families can have the similar, but we know Black families do have a particular dynamic, right? And I'm saying that somebody who's very culturally competent and has those sensibilities. And so I think, to your point, I think it's now about, where do we let people know where to plug in? And I think churches can also be a place where that can be that communal space for that to happen. Not pastoral care,
Right.
but real mental health services, right? And then our obligation as pastors, because all of us in here are licensed and ordained clergy, for us to be able to know, when we are offering pastoral care, say, okay, I've taken you as far as I can take you. Right? And us being okay with understanding this is just not, you're not equipped
Absolutely.
to continue on with this.
Or it requires a different kind. It's not unusual in physical places that if you get examined by a general practitioner, that the practitioner says, now here's what I can do for you, but what you need is some specialized attention, and that we need to pass you on to somebody who's trained and equipped and competent in that area.
Awesome. That's a great segue into the sacred place, sacred space, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Because that was one of the reasons why I decided that out of my doctorate program, that my project would be the sacred place, sacred space, because the goal was to have it situated in ministry, at churches, teaching and training our members to be trauma informed, right?
Yes.
So that we are not re-triggering and re-traumatizing people
That's right.
who have come out of traumatic situations, right? So this is a rare opportunity for the church to take on this responsibility and say, hey, we want our people to be healed right where they worship. Because 70% of the people that come to church on Sunday have been traumatized in some way, shape, or form. So ideally,
That's right.
this should be that safe space, right? In the past, the church was a refuge. That's why people came to church. They wanted healing. You know, they were hurting, right?
Right.
And then something happened along the way where, you know, congregants didn't trust the church anymore to come to the pastor or the minister and talk about what has happened to them, right? We've got to regain that trust again. We've got to be that safe place for them again, right? Because otherwise, if they're not getting all of their needs met here, right, they will go where they're getting their needs met. And we want to keep our congregation tight, especially as Black people, because, again, we have a different type of trauma that only we understand and identify with. And to your point, that's the reason why you're seeing more Black therapists, more Black psychologists, because what we are finding is that we're not opening it up to just anyone.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, too, is not only, so on point in terms of congregation care as a form of congregation care, right? But it's also because we don't we mean particularly a church-like friendship was. Church and community are one and the same. And also, to your point, I think is, how do we also let people in community know this is also, even if you don't go here, right? You too can come here.
That's right.
It's safe, you know, it's confidential, and we actually care about your well-being.
Yes.
We want, you know, and it's this idea, right? You know, the man at the well, you know, when Jesus said, do you want to be well?
Do you want to be?
And I think that's the question to even our, you know, broader community, like, do we want to be well? Because it's also some work but it also requires work.
It requires a lot of work.
Right. And so it's also, how do we also free ourselves up to say, I no longer have to operate in this dysfunction.
Yes.
Like, how I'm moving this dysfunction because I've adjusted to it and I'm living life anyway. we still we want to be whole. And so I know that's a process, but I think it's how do we make sure that people are aware that it's available, and then why? Because this is not just about us. It's how to make you a much better person, the best you can be. And like as my friends say, you can vibrate a little higher where you're not so low, where you get pulled into the drama. And then you can recognize the triggers. You can recognize, like some of us probably go in some space like, yeah, I'm not going to be here long.
Right.
You already know this is not, mentally, this is not a good space for me.
Right.
But we have to be able to get healed to be able to recognize that.
Yes.
So I think it's the awareness of, hey, y'all, and I think Dr. Haynes does a good job at this when he preaches about it too, right? We all traumatized some kind of way, right?
That's right.
Nobody has escaped that. We all obviously have different levels of the trauma, but just being okay with that, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I just wanted to also say that 'cause I'm sure your sacred place, sacred space is in church, but anybody who would come in can still benefit from that, right?
Absolutely.
They can be a part of that, and how the church then opens up its doors to say, no, it's not about you being a member. We want to make sure you are whole.
You're whole, right?
Yeah.
And then even as a Black community, aren't we still waiting on that day where we don't see our Black people standing out on the street corner, begging for money or begging for food, right? Or having mental challenges and can't get the help that they need, right? When are, as a community, right, we want to see the success of our people as a whole, right? Because if I'm healed and you're not.
Right. And not even like the very visible ways in which we're, like, to your point, is mental illness on the corners, but even as we come inside churches or even our organizations, how we bring that trauma to board tables, bring it to ministry meetings, and it manifests various kinds of ways, manipulation, or doing way too much, right? You involved in every single thing because you're not trying, because it's too much to sit. Right. So I think we have to look at the ways in which trauma shows up in all kind of ways, because sometimes we can just see it one way.
Right.
So you're talking about that visible trauma, right?
Right.
But then there's that
That's
invisible
right.
trauma.
That's right.
Which we call that soul trauma.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
We can't see it, right? But it's manifesting. Like, and that's what we have to get down to. What is causing us to disconnect? What is causing us to have low self-esteem? Yes. Causing our humanity to be robbed, right?
That's right.
Causing us to have identity issues and issues with each other, right?
Yes. Self-hate.
Right? Self-hate,
Internalized white privilege, because you know what? I'm going to come back to you. Which I thought about when you said you don't say, me and Dr. Carruthers was having this conversation, some years ago, and, we were talking about how we probably shouldn't even say white supremacy. We should say white privilege, because supremacy, and you're still some kind of way saying something is supreme about whiteness.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
The continuation of that mythology. Right.
Absolutely. Like, we actually really continue to reinforce that when we say that. So I just want to say that because you're right. I agree with that. But we internalize that, which caused me to maybe look at Dina as competition up and against. No, man, we can do this thing together.
Yes.
Which kind of shifts me into where I want to go next. Because I think, let me do one more thing, then I want to go to that. Because we kind of dealt with trauma and grief that children may be facing or someone else during this moment, how it can be magnified through holiday season, because you may have to be around that family member, or you don't have family to go around. Or you're dealing with the loss of, it's an empty chair at that table where somebody was there last year. So I want to talk about loss in a sense of two ways. One, the personal losses that we have and how can we give attention to that and have some tools to deal with that when those emotions come up. When we start thinking about that loved one, right? For some people, the loss is real fresh. It could have happened last week. Then I want to talk about loss during the holiday season as relates to, I forget the author of the book, but root shock, right? How being uprooted from family systems and what's familiar to you. And I know children can experience that. A family has to move around because of loss of job or whatever. Now you're not in your home anymore. You could be living in your car in a shelter. So just what can we talk about, tools that people can think through as we're going this holiday season? Because, you see everybody music is playing. You're supposed to be happy, and it's that time of the year where you're giving it, where more people who normally may be stingy and mean try to be nice. Because just how people
Right,
say
exactly.
this idea that this season you're supposed to be joyful.
Yes.
Right. What can we talk through or give people to talk about how you deal with the various kinds of loss, whether that's a family member or being uprooted, particularly children, right? How they may be processed, and how a parent might be able to help their child through that process as well.
Yeah.
So I'll take it.
Go ahead.
I think the one thing that we have to do is realize that through loss, there is a process that we have to go through. And some of us try to avoid it, right? There's like the 7 stages of grief. And one of the stages is depression, right? But the good thing about depression is that you have finally gotten to the point where you have accepted or almost accepted that I've got to do something different. So everybody gets to the stage of depression one way or the other. Then what do you do about it after that? You start accepting and you start looking at resolutions. Like, how can I resolve this pain that's going on? I've got to get some help. So we might want to encourage families, okay? Hey, as a group, let's talk about it. Let's create groups for parents and children, right? So the parents can have a conversation around loss. The children can have a conversation around loss. And together we can know what each other is thinking and come up with solutions for our families, right? But what can they do like right now? The first thing I would say is get help if you need it. Relax. Learn how to breathe. Breathing is so important, right? Because what breathing does is the most calm, stress-relieving activity that you can ever do. So if you want to just take in a few breaths, like count to 4. And then, a lot of people say, let's exhale. I say release. Because in breathing, we want to let some things go. Right. And so if you cannot breathe because of everything that's going on, you're going to just succumb to the chaos, right? You might scream, you might holler.
Right.
You might say, like George Floyd said, I can't breathe. And they were wondering why this man wouldn't be still, right? Because he couldn't breathe. If you cannot breathe, you're not going to be still. You're going to be all over the place trying to figure it out.
That's right.
So I say, breathe. Take in a few breaths. Do it until you're at a state of calmness, right? The other thing that we need to do is we need to start showing compassion to ourselves. Because when you're losing, right, you start to blame yourself. You start to, blame your family members or blame anyone around you, right? So we need to stop blaming ourselves and just being kind and generous and speaking good to ourselves.
Yes, for sure.
The other thing that we need to do is we need to connect. Because connection after food and a place to stay, connection is one of the greatest things that we yearn for as human beings. But we want to get with positive connections.
Right.
That's important. Don't just connect with anybody.
Right.
Get with people that are positive and connect with them. And maybe this connection will also help you to have a shoulder to lean on, right? And to help you work through the process.
Yes, thank you.
The last thing I want to say is that we want to do is we want to have, you're not ready for this, but show compassion towards others. Because while you're showing compassion towards others, while you're going through, your mind is now focused on not your problem, but looking at others who are worse than you. Because there's always someone that's going through something that's more devastating than you are. So my thing is, start volunteering at your church, serving your community, serving your family, your friends. Doing whatever you can do, again, to kind of alleviate this pain by saying, you know what, I'm not going to just sit in this pain too long, right? I'm going to get to some resolutions, and part of that is caring for yourself and caring for others.
Thank you. Reverend White, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I love how she gives a wonderful clinical kind of a view of some steps to take, and I'm looking at some of the challenges that we have in dealing with grief and trauma, especially grief, by way of our cultural orientation. And that we have a cultural orientation that we ought to always be receiving and don't really talk about what it means to do releasing, to let some things go. We talk about the idea in church circles about this being a season, but we don't talk about what seasons mean, that there are shifts where things are coming in, but there are also shifts where things are going out, and all of that. If we go back to that, African idea, right, it's part of that circle of life, right? Yeah. And so part of the reason that it is fascinating for us to deal with the conversation of grief, because sometimes we're dealing with it from a cultural, and here I mean from the United States, a cultural orientation that I shouldn't lose. That I shouldn't let things go, that I shouldn't lose relationships. And that is counter to the reality that, for everything, here we go, Ecclesiastes, there is a season, right?
That's right.
And even verse 6 talks about the idea that there's a time for you to gain and a time to let some things go.
That's right.
Yes.
And one of the biggest things is fascinating is just thinking about how we think about grief. Jada Pinkett Smith has written a book, her memoirs called Worthy, and she talked about so much of that she went through by way of challenges and trauma and addiction, all because there were places where she did not really process the trauma that she went through, and got to a place in her life where so much was going well, and yet there became a place where she just really had to she almost fell apart, as it were, and just needed a different kind of care for that soul trauma that she had been going through. Right. She makes the confession. She says that in our country we look at grief as weakness, and so people are always trying to be strong in grief, as opposed to allowing themselves to go through the process of grief. And here's what she says. She says, when I felt like it was okay to both release and to feel a place where I could feel relief from what I've lost, that I discovered that I was looking at grief as something that was going to steal some things from me. But when I got to that place where I could deal with relief and release, that I found that grief brought me gifts. Yeah. And I'll just, with all that she said, I think all of those are helpful in the moment. I think that there's something to gain from the recognition that a seasonal view of life in general, our lives in particular, and the lives of other people in our midst, give us a different kind of orientation of not thinking that I should not have lost them, and now I'm wrestling with the anger and the depression and the fighting against and the being strong in, but rather the recognition that this is part of the life cycle. Now, what is it that I want to be able to gain from that? That there are ways that we want to be able to gain some gifts from our grief. Wow. And when we look at it that way, I think there's some ways that we can continue to allow grief to help us to be stronger. So often we're looking at how we can be strong in our grief and not allow ourselves to gain the gifts of griefs that make us stronger from having gone through it.
Woo, y'all have said a lot that's been so helpful, right? And that's a good segue, a beautiful segue into how I want to kind of end the conversation. And one thing I want to say, I like the fact that you brought up that if we begin to shift how we even view life in terms of seasons, and particularly, rooted in African tradition, right? Yeah. I always think about it as, and this is just kind of what I adopted in my own life, that there's a time to gather and a time to leave behind. And sometimes those are people,
Yes.
relationships, there are things, and then what do you need to pick up? So I like the way you frame that. That's kind of one of my philosophies that I live by in life. But this is a good segue into Kwanzaa, because I think as we talk about various kinds of grief, right? Like personal loss, but also grief and trauma that comes from outside forces that creates that soul trauma, right? Whether that's police violence or whether it's structural violence by way of public policies and laws, et cetera. So I want to look at Kwanzaa as a ritual, right, that has the power for us to turn to that
Yeah.
to actually deal with grief and soul trauma if we were to make it more than just that time of the year.
That's good.
Right, if it becomes a lifestyle as opposed to something nice to do, we'll go buy all the Kwanzaa things for those 7 days and we're done and posting. But how does that become ingrained in our everyday life? You know, so because I think it's power from it's power in that. And so let's start with maybe River White.
Okay.
So let's just talk about, well, one, we don't want to assume everybody knows what Kwanzaa is. So just tell us, what is Kwanzaa? One, let's go there. Let's start there.
Okay. Yeah, Kwanzaa is a holiday that had been pulled together at a real challenging time, at a traumatic time, actually, right? It was in the aftermath of what was in 1965,
Yes.
August of 1965.
Right.
Had the Watts Rebellion, the Watts Rebellion, not the riot, but the
Right,
rebellion,
right.
That
Language is important.
Yes, indeed. That was a resistance, a rebellion against the trauma that was going on by way of the institutional oppression and racism. And there had also been some police brutality and police violence that had precipitated itself in Watts, right around that Los Angeles area in California. And there was a riot that took place, I believe it was 6 days fighting, and it was in the aftermath of that in '66 that
Right.
Dr. Malena Karenga said, we need something that helps to bring, as it were, some healing and restoration. And it was fascinating in terms of his thinking, because he was looking at something that was non-religious, although he positioned it during some, high and holy days, right, of Christmas and New Year's, and something that was also not centered on a particular hero, but rather on an African heritage. The idea of being able to collect in community, to identify in community,
Right.
to reach back to the kind of what he calls in one of those traditional greatness of our history and heritage, to find a space where we look at ourselves differently and commune with one another differently in the celebration of the Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles, and that would allow people to be able to see themselves, see their lives, and see how we pull together in a whole different kind of a way.
And so, excellent, because just what you, and this is why I wanted to kind of have this conversation at this intersection, because it came out of Black folk. It wasn't just 65, it happened before.
Oh,
60.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
But no,
Oh,
you
yeah.
understand what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah,
like,
yeah.
what we're talking about now, like the collective grief and soul trauma we have as a people,
Yes.
right? Kwanzaa was that was born out of that we might gather something, gain something from that collective grief and trauma that we have. And I'll also say, though not religious, because religion, right, is a Western construct anyway, the
Right.
language itself.
Right.
Yes.
So,
As
but it's very,
opposed to,
but it's very African in the sense of, well, God is everywhere. We don't say it's not religion. Is not what we do; it's who we are.
Exactly.
You know,
Right.
so that's why I think Kwanzaa and how we might view that maybe different. I'm trying to get people to think about how to view it differently this year,
Okay.
as opposed to let's just do that's over. Let's move on to New Year,
Right.
But more so, how do these 7 principles, right? How do we make sure we incorporate these in everyday life? Because I think those are some of the ways that we can begin the healing process.
Absolutely.
Because how can you really internalize those 7 principles and not understand your identity?
Yes.
your self-esteem, your self-worth. And how can you not then connect with people who look like you and don't see you as the enemy, or I see you as the enemy, right? Just in the principles alone, if we really practice those daily, we make that a part of what we do and not think of it as being something, as particularly if you are Christian, of being something separate from that.
Right.
Right. If we can move out of that white Christianity or that white notion of what it means to be Christian from a European standpoint.
Right.
Right.
A westernized conceptualization
of Christianity. Then we see how, this all makes sense. If you really look at the 7 principles, look like Jesus to me.
Yes, right?
So let's talk about how we might be able to do a little bit more beyond the 7 days of Kwanzaa.
You know, that's going to require a lot of work, right? Because, like Pastor White said, it's situated right between Christmas or right after Christmas, right? And so a lot of Black people think that, okay, I celebrate Christmas, it's one day. I celebrate Kwanzaa for 7 days, and then that's it. We'll do this next year, right? So I think we have to be very intentional in creating a space where we can, meet once a month to continue to have these conversations and then show people how do we integrate Kwanzaa into our everyday lives. The one that I love the most is Nia, the purpose, right? So that we are rebuilding our communities. And while we're rebuilding our communities, we're rebuilding ourselves, right? And so as a result, now we're supporting ourselves. We're supporting each other. I want to see some more Black millionaires that came from nothing. All right. And if I have to spend my money to help them get there, I'm going to do it.
Well, I didn't come from nothing, but I would love to be a millionaire.
Hey,
it can happen for you too.
Don't leave the rest of it. Tell you what.
Well, I'm just saying that I think it's more powerful when you've started from the bottom. Now we up, right?
There we go.
I'm just saying because we know the struggle behind the work. Like, it took more for someone who had nothing to come, from nothing and become a millionaire than it is for someone who had resources. That's all I'm saying. But you can be a part of it.
No, I agree with that. But I think that's important, though, because here's what we don't want to do in community, right? We don't want to, how can I say it? We don't want to put struggle in a hierarchy, if that makes sense.
Right. Right.
But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
But
because to add to that, one of the things that's so fascinating is how often it can be really challenging for persons to hang on to money, who can get windfalls of money but not hold on to it. So there's something about developing, as it were, the kind of mindsets and patterns, et cetera, that allows it to be something that can be passed on generations, that can take richness and make it wealth.
Yes,
right.
That's good. Yeah.
And so I think
Can I jump into something? I would say I love what it said here, right? That those kind of conversations and that idea. So she likes day 5, Nia. There is, but jumping on those spaces where we deal with that umoja, that very first place, that sense of unity, that sense that we are in this thing together.
Yes, that's powerful.
That reclaiming of that kind of mindset. Because we, talk about, quote unquote, the old days where if you needed a cup of sugar, you needed something, you can come and get it. That we just laid to rest my wife's mother. And one of the things that they would talk about is that her family was an extended family, that the nieces and nephews were treated like children. Her name was Jewel Jones. Since I'm shouting her out, I guess I might as well shout her all the way out.
That's right.
And so Julie Jones and her husband Odell, right? They had nieces and nephews who were treated like children. They still act in one sense like brothers and sisters. They had extended family who were there, who were not birthed by bloodline, and yet who were brought up like family, right? They opened their doors in ways that they would cook in ways that if you happen to stop by, there was a place at the table for you, right? There's a sense of unity that gets beyond that Western concept and secular concept. and selfish concept of just
Yes.
me, myself, and I.
Yes.
And that idea that we're in this thing together. And then, of course, that, segues into, well, that's not day 2, but 3 and 4, right? That idea of that ujima, of that collective work and responsibility.
Responsibility,
And that ujama, that cooperative economics, right? And so
Yes.
the idea of being able to pull together in the midst of that and to realize that we're in this thing together is so powerful and so important in this, and working on that can again adds a different way of resources and tools for us to be able to respond. Even if I don't have access to mental health professionals, knowing that I'm identified in a community
that's
where
right.
I'm loved and I'm cared about,
That's
where
right.
people are looking out for me, where I feel like I belong and I feel like I have something to contribute, gives me resources for resilience in the
Yes.
midst of grief and trauma.
And as you
It's
were
powerful.
saying that, I'm thinking about Kwanzaa and the 7 principles. I'm saying this is all undergirded by Ubuntu, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean? That at the bare minimum, I have to understand this, that I can only be who I am because if you are who you are.
are,
There's-
yes.
So if I
Yes.
understand that, well, unity, well, now I have to be with you, right? I have to support you because I can only be me. If you are being the best you can be. We got to, so that's what I was thinking about as we were thinking about Kwanzaa. But I love the way you're all saying how we can move beyond the 7 days, and how does every day, how do I wake up saying, well, now, because I always say I'm not the most creative person, but I know that I'm endowed with creativity because we all have it.
Absolutely.
Some of us is gifted to be creatives, right? But I don't really lean into my creative. I mean, it'll come up here and there, but I never sit and actively, try to stimulate that part. So that's what I mean about. So for me, this made me think in the moment. So for me, I think I'm going to be more every day with intentionality. How can I really be intentional about being creative?
Right.
I say that ain't me, I don't do it. As opposed to, well, no. God is a God of creation,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So therefore, I have that in me.
That's right.
So, so thank you for that.
I will say also, right, we got to think about it in a similar fashion that we think about this idea of learning, right? And the idea that sometimes we think, or intelligences, and that it's only a particular kind of a way. And that creativity
right.
doesn't
That's right.
always mean I'm having to, sometimes I'm creating by what I bring to the table, where I manifest something from an idea into reality. And it may not be something that just blew your mind because of how innovative it was, but even bringing something into reality is creative.
But see, I think that's where culturally we have to shift that narrative. So when people think about what's creative, it has to be innovative. It has to be pop. It has to be wet. So because I think that puts pressure on people too to make you think you're not creative.
Yes.
Because of that. So thank you for that. Because I think, and that's what I mean by how do we take these, I know we're running out of time. It always happens.
Oh, no.
It always happens. But this is what I mean by taking these principles and unpacking them more to kind of show where, and we incorporate these in our everyday life. I think these are ways that we can begin to deal with our soul trauma, our collective
Yes.
grief and soul trauma as well. Yeah. We're go one last thing and then
One last thing. I want to tell you that you are creative, right? Because you are resourceful.
Now I am that.
Because it takes creativity to be resourceful.
Yes, indeed.
Oh.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank
That's
you,
Coochie
sister.
Chakalia right there.
That's the word. Me and Cheryl struggle with saying that word. We struggle with, I struggle. I don't
Coochie
care.
Chakalia.
Every year I never listen. This has been an
Coochie
amazing
Chakalia,
episode of Family's Classroom. Let's give it up and thank Dr. Dina Anderson, Reverend William White, WEW, for being in the classroom on today. This has been an amazing conversation. So let's do a quick lightning round. You got 1 minute each. Then I have 1 minute for my close. I always like to end because I know our vocations, what we do every day is not the whole of who we are. And because we're all public facing, people see a side of us. So Dr. Anderson, tell us something about yourself that people don't know, that would be fascinating to hear, or what brings you joy?
What brings me joy is being a humanitarian and serving others and giving and providing for people who do not have.
Okay.
Gives me great joy.
Okay. That's true. And I can once again attest to that's what she does. I'm waiting on that star to get be a millionaire, so I'll come back to you on that one.
Come on, together. We on this side saying we in that together. There's, I guess what brings me joy, I do like creating things. I do like when I'm able to see something or have something revealed or bring something to light about that is innovative. But it also happens in the kitchen when I get a chance to
Oh wow.
get in and do
Didn't
some
know
things.
that. Okay.
Yeah, in the kitchen, I like creating things and do it. And you know what? It didn't even hit me. You're the one who had me think differently about how I do what I do. So we've gone out to eat on occasion, and it's something for the two of us to go.
It is.
It is something. But that's a whole nother. We don't have a minute for that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
we have.
It is.
I'm
though.
sure that's
I-
very interesting.
I'm giving it and admitted it's true.
But one of the things that she told me when I came back from a place where we had a salad bar, she said, "That is a beautiful looking salad." I have never forgotten that. I don't know why that stood out to me, because I'm just doing what I do, right? And
Right.
My salads are not on the small plate; they on the
Oh,
big,
yeah.
they on the big plate, and it is ornate,
Oh, yes,
etc.
it
but
is.
it's layered and it's colorful and all that stuff, and I'm just doing it, right? And she said that, and I said, "I have never forgotten that," and that's been 10 years ago.
Wow.
So look at that. So I like
Yes.
creating.
Nice, nice. Yes, I get teased often by family and friends because eating is an art form for me. Mm-hmm. And yes, Dr. Anderson has experienced it too. So there's that. So I can't deny it.
Yeah.
So listen, thank you all so much. I've enjoyed it. This has been a beautiful time with you all, and I know something was said for people to be able to have some tools to think about this season of grief and loss and the various ways that we experience that. And it's not just death, but it's death of relationships or what children are dealing with. That we all are dealing with something, and how do we help each other get through this process? That is, and I think it's what I gather most out of all we talked about, that we are in this together, and you can't do it alone.
Right.
Yes.
That it takes all of us to do that and to search out community. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So listen, don't forget hey, you saw the two amazing guests we had today and what we've had all season long. And way you can support us is to buy a Fannie Lou Classroom t-shirt that's always available to you. If you're watching on YouTube, you can scan that QR code. If you are listening, you can go to friendshipwest.org, click on Justice, scroll down, you'll see Fannie Lou Classroom, link to purchase your t-shirt. And we would be more than happy to get that out to you sooner than later. And then we are still taking contributions, financial contributions for our eye care donation. So part of this is how we also deal with a lot of our children who may be dealing with forms of soul trauma by what they experience every day by impoverishment. Because impoverishment has a way of psychologically, mentally, even physically, right, can stunt even the growth of children and how they're interpreting what's happening around them. Children understand lack. Right. So for us, what we do at Friendship West, we adopted at least 2 schools, particularly one that has the highest level of impoverishment in DISD, Dallas Independent School District. And we want to support them all throughout the year, not just during Christmas, but during Christmas, we try to do something extra because we want kids to feel a part of it, not look like they have to be on the outside watching other children get gifts and be blessed. So you can scan that QR code if you're watching, make financial contributions. All of the contributions go directly to the 2 schools that we support. And so you can give all year round, not just during Christmas time. So thank you for those who have already given. We have received quite a bit, and all that money will be going out within the next 2 weeks to both of our schools that the children and their families will be blessed during this time. And then next week, as we nearer to a close of season 3, we have 2 more episodes. I'm very excited. You don't want to miss next week. And I believe that when we tie in our last 3 episodes, this one coming up next week also makes sense. We're going to talk about creating a beautiful world, the power of the arts in our everyday lives, because also different art forms have a way of bringing healing and grief, and even dealing with trauma that we deal with. So we're going to talk about the power of arts in our everyday life on next week. And we have my good friend, Asmira Hamari Davis. She's going to kind of bring us that Pan-African kind of lens of the arts. She is Palestinian and Nigerian, and she, uses her art forms across the world. She's located here in the U.S., but she is all around the world doing this. So we can't wait to hear from Asmira. Then we have our very own Dr. Michelle McGee Norfleet, who will join us. amazing. And then we have Dr. Jamie Calazar, another brilliant, amazing brother. Look, it's going to be hot next week. You want to be here now. We do have creatives, and they do bring a different kind of energy. So we're going to have creators in this space next week. So it's going to be an amazing time. You do not want to miss next week. Tune in, 12 o'clock noon. Make sure you tell your friends and your family. If they don't follow us, hey, have them go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can be alerted when we go live. And, of course, find us on Facebook and on Instagram. Like us, and please share our pages. And we look forward to seeing you next week right here in the classroom.
From the church house.